I'll hand it over to you, Tessa.
Great. Thank you, Madison, and good evening, everyone. And thank you for joining us for our live virtual voter engagement information session. This is an opportunity for us to gather community input on voting methods and explore how residents may cast their ballot in the 2022 municipal election. This afternoon, we are joined by City of Sault Ste. Marie staff, including Rachel Tazinski, our city clerk, Madison Zupa, deputy city clerk, Nancy Scott, accessibility coordinator, and myself, Tessa Vecchio, communications officer, as your moderator. The purpose of our session today is to provide broad, neutral information on the local municipal election and alternative voting methods, including benefits and drawbacks of each, as well as accessibility as it relates to the municipal election. We will then ask you for feedback about the voting methods that the City of Sault Ste. Marie could use in the 2022 municipal election. It is important for Council to understand what methods voters in Sault Ste. Marie want, what they are comfortable with, and what they can trust. Council does have a requirement to make this decision before May 1st, 2022. So tonight we are providing you with a lot of information and we welcome your questions. We would also like you to provide feedback by taking our survey online at saultestemarie.ca/election. We have had over 500 responses to the survey thus far, and we will be taking any additional feedback until May 15th. Alternatively, you can email comments to election@cityssm.on.ca or phone 705-759-5388. Following the conclusion of the presentation, we will be taking questions that are posted on the Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. You can also email questions tonight to election@cityssm.on.ca, or you could phone questions into 705-759-2745. I would like to take a minute to remind everyone that this is a place and an opportunity for different ideas, perspectives, opinions, and values to come together and share respectfully. Your questions and insights are needed, and it is important to understand that we cannot share any disrespectful or rude comments or respond to them. So please keep your comments and questions respectful and kind. Our agenda tonight and timeline is as follows. So we're going to start with a brief presentation from our city clerk, who will provide information on the local municipal election and election principles. Next, we will move to our deputy city clerk for information on voting methods and the benefits and drawbacks of each. And finally, our accessibility coordinator will provide information on accessibility as it relates to the municipal election. The formal presentation tonight is scheduled to take about 25 minutes, at which point we will open it up to questions and answers from you, our valued participants. I would also like to let everyone know that the session is being recorded so that we can post the recording for those that are not able to attend the live stream. The recording will be available on the city's YouTube channel and on the city's website at cityssm.on.ca/election. Oh, my apology, that's citysaultestemarie.ca/election. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Rachel Tazinski, the city clerk for the City of Sault Ste. Marie. Now, the city clerk does have a responsibility to serve as a returning officer and chief electoral officer in the administration and delivery of municipal and school board elections. Every Ontario municipality is required to appoint a municipal clerk, and each of those are statutory positions who share that responsibility for delivering elections in their local municipalities. The entire clerk's office team does play an important and impartial role in delivering election services to our community. So with that, I will pass it along to Rachel. Rachel, over to you.
Thank you, Tessa. So municipal elections take place every 4 years, except if a vacancy on council occurs during the term. Of course, there can be a by-election. But for voting day, our next voting day is going to be October 24, 2022. The Municipal Elections Act provides the regulatory framework for municipal elections, and it is highly legislated in terms of timeframes for notices and filing and requirements for eligible electors and so on. For the purposes of tonight's discussion, it's important to note that a municipal council under the Municipal Elections Act can pass bylaws authorizing the use of voting and vote counting equipment, as well as the use of an alternative voting method, such as voting by mail or by telephone, that does not require electors to attend at a voting place in order to vote. And the reason that we've put that in quotation marks in the presentation is that's the direct quote of the actual section of the Municipal Elections Act. So you'll note that while it doesn't specifically articulate internet voting, the words "that does not require electors to attend at a voting place in order to vote" provides municipalities with the ability to pass a bylaw authorizing internet voting as well as voting by mail or by telephone. So the principles that underpin the Municipal Elections Act are ballot secrecy. That is, that the secrecy and confidentiality of the voting process is paramount. Fairness. The election is to be fair and non-biased. Voters and candidates shall be treated fairly and consistently. Accessibility. The election shall be accessible to the voters. So that's not only in terms of physical accessibility, but also in terms of documents and ballots and so on, to allow the greatest accessibility to the voters. Integrity. The integrity of the voting process shall be maintained throughout the election. And certainty. There's to be certainty that the results of the election reflect the votes cast. And eligibility, in that valid votes are counted and invalid votes are rejected so far as reasonably possible. And I think it's important to point out that the onus is on the voter. So with respect to eligibility and personal compliance with the legislation and Municipal Elections Act, that onus is always on the voter. So if a voter received a ballot and they aren't in fact eligible, they ought not to vote, and the onus is on them not to. Or perhaps if they received a ballot that they weren't entitled to in terms of what ward they're in or school trustee, the onus is on the elector to determine that they are in fact eligible to vote. So the voter engagement initiative has, there have been a couple of components. In December 2018, there was a council resolution requesting staff to bring forth recommendations to improve voter turnout. In the 2018 municipal election, the voter turnout was 40.3%. And of course, we would like to see that higher. Historically, Sault Ste. Marie has had a greater level of participation than most of our comparators across the province. The provincial average from 1988 to 2014, which are the statistics we have at hand, are 40 to 45% voter turnout. When we've drilled down into that data for comparator municipalities of 50,000 plus population, it's actually been about 35% provincially. So as much as Sault Ste. Marie is a little bit higher than that average, we certainly would like to improve that and engage more voters. Recently, in March 2021, there was a council resolution that was spurred in part by the COVID-19 pandemic, asking staff to investigate vote by mail, which is something that we would have been looking at regardless, but certainly has, like so many things, been accelerated by the pandemic. I'll turn it over to Madison to discuss various voting methods that are available.
Great, thanks, Rachel. The next portion of the presentation will discuss voting methods and some of the benefits and drawbacks. So we have a number of voting methods to discuss tonight. The first is in-person manual count, which most people in our community are familiar with and would have participated in the last previous elections. So in-person manual count is where eligible voters physically attend a specified voting location to cast their ballot. Once the ballot is given to the voter, their name is struck off the voters list. Once the ballot is cast, it's placed into a secure box for manual counting once voting is closed. In-person tabulator count, it's similar to in-person manual count in the fact that eligible voters physically attend a specified voting location to cast their ballot. And once their ballot is given, their name is struck off the voters list. However, with tabulator count, once the ballot is marked, the voter feeds the ballot into a tabulator. The tabulator scans and interprets the ballot, and the vote is cast. The ballot is deposited into a secure ballot box, and the tabulator provides a cumulative total of all votes cast once voting is closed. Vote by mail. Eligible voters will receive a ballot package in the mail that includes instructions, voter declaration card, a ballot, a secrecy folder or envelope, and a postage prepaid return envelope. Once returned, the voter's name is struck off the voters list, and the secrecy envelope containing the ballot is placed into a secure ballot box until voting day. Votes may be counted manually or by use of tabulators once voting is closed. Vote by phone, another remote voting option, is where eligible voters cast their vote by calling a designated telephone number. Voters will receive a PIN and may be required to answer a security question. Once validated, an audio version of the ballot is presented to the voter. Once the selection is made and confirmed, the vote is cast and the voter's name is struck off the list. Once voting is closed, the results are generated and provided to the clerk. Vote online. So eligible voters cast their vote on a specified website. Voters receive voting credentials, for example, an identification number and PIN, and use them to receive an electronic ballot. The voter makes their selection and casts their ballot over the internet. Once the ballot is cast, the voter's name is struck off the voters list. Once voting is closed, the results are generated and provided to the city clerk. And finally, the Vote from Home program. In the 2018 Sault Ste. Marie election, the city provided this Vote from Home program, where eligible voters could register to have the ballot box brought to their home. It was a very successful program and provided greater accessibility to eligible voters. And in 2018, 66 voters participated in the Vote from Home program. So just want to spend a few minutes providing some very high level benefits and drawbacks of the different voting methods. So first, in-person benefits. Election staff are able to verify voter identification in person at the voting locations. It's considered tradition, and as stated before, it's familiar to many voters locally who have cast their ballot in this fashion in the past. And there's a manual recount possible because there's actual physical ballots available to recount. Some of the drawbacks: accessible and available locations. So the locations for voting are becoming more scarce as buildings close, and just looking at all the different logistics with locations. There is potential for spoiled ballots. So if a ballot is cast and it's not correctly marked, or it cannot be interpreted correctly, there's the chance for potential for spoiled ballots. The staffing levels required to administer an in-person election are greater, and also the availability of qualified staff to administer the election is also a challenge. Time constraints, and what we mean by this is that there are specified times to vote. So there's advanced polls and voting day, but there are very specified times that people can vote. And the timing of the results, particularly with the manual count, may delay the results and the announcement of, or the finalization of the election, just because of the physical counting of the ballots. So vote by mail, some of the benefits: it increases accessibility to eligible voters. It does not require a proxy voting, and a manual recount is possible because, again, there's physical ballots to recount. Some of the drawbacks: there's potential for the ballots to be lost or damaged through the mail process. There's potential, again, for spoiled ballots if they're received and inaccurate or incorrectly marked, or cannot be interpreted. Time constraints, and there's a couple elements of the time constraints. The vote by mail does require a postmark for submission, but there's also a potential for maybe a candidate didn't get to your door before you actually cast your ballot in the vote by mail system, and that's also similar to other remote voting methods. And the timing of the results, again, with the manual count, you're physically counting ballots that could delay the announcement of the results by a little bit. Vote by phone and vote online have similar benefits and drawbacks, and are often paired together as a package when people use this type of remote voting method. So phone benefits, vote by phone benefits can include increased accessibility. Again, no requirement for proxy voting. There's flexible timing where it's a 24/7 option to vote during a specified time period, but you don't have to go in between certain hours. You can do it at your convenience. Fewer spoiled ballots. This is due to checks that are in the system in case you've accidentally overvoted. It asks for confirmation of your votes. There's less possibility of spoiled ballots. You get fast and accurate results, and there's a digital audit trail. And it's a familiar technology with your phone. So many people have a phone in their home or use a handheld mobile device. So there's familiarity with the technology. Potential drawbacks, potential frustration. So if you have a lot of candidates on the ballot, that could cause potential frustration, or sound levels or pronunciation of people's names or candidates' names. There could be technical difficulties if there's an influx of call volume all at the same time. It could potentially cause some technical difficulties. Security concerns, and there's no physical ballot, so a manual recount isn't possible. And a vote online benefits, again, increased accessibility, no requirement for proxy voting. Flexible timing, again, you can do it at your convenience within a specified time frame, but it is a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week option. Fewer spoiled ballots, again, with the same checks in the system. And it provides for fast and accurate results with a digital audit trail. Potential drawbacks, again, potential frustration. And this could be caused by a couple of things, familiarity with the technology, digital literacy, and internet access is not possible or not available to everyone. So making sure, people have access to this method. There are some solutions to that, but it can be a challenge. Technical difficulties, as we've seen in the 2018 municipal election, there were communities that had technical difficulties with exclusive vote online platforms. Security concerns, and again, because there's no physical ballot, there's no manual recount possible. So as Rachel had indicated earlier, we are looking at alternative voting methods, and remote voting in particular has come to the forefront of our conversation with the global pandemic, but there are other concerns that and other challenges and other benefits to remote voting. Other health concerns where people might not be able to attend a in-person voting location. Accessibility, which Nancy Scott will be discussing momentarily. There's barriers for people that have mobility challenges, and also other challenges and barriers to in-person voting. Maybe you own property in Sault Ste. Marie, but you don't live locally. And if someone who owns property, but maybe out of town for work or school, have the ability to participate in the election process. So I'll turn it over to Nancy to discuss accessibility.
Thanks, Madison. I'm really happy to be here and involved in this voter engagement session to provide information and to receive input on accessibility in our municipal elections. First, I'm going to speak to what we do. So accessible training. Election workers receive accessibility training, that being accessible customer service training and training on the accessibility tools available for voters that can remove barriers to casting ballots. Accessible in-person voting locations. City staff assesses polling locations to ensure locations are barrier-free, taking into consideration parking, entry doors, and at-grade entries. If there is not an automatic door opener at the polling site on the main entry door, an election worker will be present at the door to open it for voters as needed. Accessible transportation. The City of Sault Ste. Marie provides free transit and parabus transportation on election day. Pre and post-election pre and post-election input. City clerk staff attends an accessibility advisory committee meeting prior to the election to present an overview of the election process, focusing on accessibility, and receives input from the committee. Also, post-election feedback is forwarded to the city clerk. Now, how can we improve access to voting? So on the locations, we would like to know if community members experience physical barriers at voting locations in the past and what those barriers were. And also, are there other barriers experienced by community members in past municipal elections? Now to consider voting methods. The different voting methods were outlined today in this session. Consider these options. What voting method would best remove your barrier to participation in the election process? So in closing, I would like to remind community members of the ways to report barriers at any time within the City of Sault Ste. Marie owned and operated buildings, facilities, and services. You can contact the department in question directly. You can contact me, the accessibility coordinator, or you can fill out the report a barrier fillable form on the City of Sault Ste. Marie website. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. Just want to close out the presentation with this slide. And in addition to the community engagement piece and the feedback that we receive from community members, we're going to be incorporating that as part of our review amongst other considerations, including integrity of the process that Rachel had discussed earlier, security of the ballot, access, to which Nancy had just reviewed, the administration of the election, and costs. So these are just some of the factors that we will be looking at in the overall review and providing recommendations back to council at a later date with all of this information for them to consider.
Great. Well, thank you so much for the interesting discussion there. This concludes the formal portion of our agenda for this evening. And at this point, we're going to open it up to any questions and comments from our participants. So I'll just, again, remind the participants that you're welcome to post a question either in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen or in the chat functionality at the bottom of your screen as well. And then to get us started here, we have a few questions that we've taken from online participants. So I'm going to ask the first question on their behalf. And the first question that we received is, in your experience, what reasons have residents indicated for not voting? So we'll start maybe with Rachel on that one.
I mean, it's always difficult to quantify. Um, Certainly, we think that voter apathy is one of the contributing factors. It can also be dependent on local issues at the time. If there's a race for mayor, if there are a lot of acclamations, we often don't see as much involvement and so on. And what we do have, fortunately, from 2018, we've been able to track age of voters and age of voters within specific wards. So we're gaining some insights from that data into where we need to target our communications, perhaps both by age and geographically. I guess I would also say that it's not a problem specific to Sault Ste. Marie. I mean, municipalities across the province struggle with how to engage more voters and increase voter turnout. And as well, provincially and federally, it's also an issue. I think it's exciting, this process, that we can examine more ways that may encourage more people to participate. And I think Madison may have more to add in that regard.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. I think, doing the research on all these topics, I've come across some insights, not particularly or necessarily for Sault Ste. Marie, but education, information, and awareness of the election and the election process and how to register has come up as a concern for people not being able to participate in the election process. So I think we have to look at that information and come up, with ideas and creativity around, getting that information out to the community as we've done in the past, and look at best practices on voter engagement from across the province and from Canada, and see if there's anything else that we can do to help increase voter engagement. Some of the other things that I've come across are just, maybe not having a connection to the candidates, or like Rachel said, having that, knowing what their, platforms are, what they're all about. So I think just some of that, and also just the communication piece is part of it. I don't know if Nancy wanted to add any additional comments.
Yeah, sure. For sure, excuse me, people with disabilities at times can't get out as easily as other folks, and some people with disabilities can't get out at all at the best of times. So for sure, and I think it was evident in the end part of your presentation there, Madison, that all these remote voting options would increase accessibility and make it much easier for people with disabilities to vote.
Yeah, that's great. And I remember the last election that we had here, the municipal election, in one of the advanced voting poll stations, there was a weather issue with flooding going on locally in the city. So, something as simple as the weather could definitely deter people from voting in an election, right? Depending if it's too cold or slippery or wet. So there's lots of things to consider as to why people don't vote. Another question that came through on our online platform here is, have other municipalities in Ontario utilized alternative voting methods, such as voting by mail, over the phone, or online? Now, I'm sure this is a really popular question right now, considering the pandemic that we're in. So people are thinking about alternative voting methods. So what have other municipalities done in this regard?
That's a great question, Tessa. Thank you. And I have been doing a lot of research on these alternative voting methods, and through AMCTO, after the 2018 election, a survey was put out, and the respondents that responded to the survey provided what kind of alternative voting methods they utilized. And all different methods were utilized: paper ballots, both manual count and with the use of tabulators, internet voting, paper ballot and internet voting combined, vote by mail. These were all methods that were utilized by different municipalities across the province. I think, depending if it's an urban or a rural geography, that will influence what voting methods are utilized. And the trend over time, since I've been looking at some of the data, the trend is that there is an increase in the use of internet voting, but that doesn't mean that the other voting methods haven't been utilized. So I don't know if
I
anyone
would
else
just
does.
add to that it's dependent on the character of the community as well, right? And I think where you've got perhaps more
Oh, did we lose Rachel here for a bit?
She may have frozen.
Okay, well, we could come back to her.
Sure.
I do have some more questions for you. And just as we were talking about alternative voting methods, with that said, so what measures would be in place to ensure that the integrity of the electoral vote is kept? Oh,
Sure. I can start with that one.
Sure.
So I think that's going back to Rachel's points earlier in the presentation, the integrity of the process is so important. And I think that any voting method that is chosen will have protocols and procedures in place to help mitigate any challenges that may arise. I think that you have remote voting and in-person voting. It's a unsupervised versus supervised voter identification process, so that's one thing. But I think you have to put those elements into your protocols and procedures and make sure that your election staff uphold those protocols and procedures, and the integrity of the election staff is paramount as well. I see Rachel's back. Did you want to add anything in there, Rachel, for that question?
I had a little internet blip, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that there's the legislative requirements, and then sort of in addition to that are robust procedures that, regardless of what method or methods you're using, you need to have robust procedures in order to preserve the integrity of the vote.
For sure, that's very important. I have a final question here from our online participants. And the question is, if the city decides to move forward with one of the 3 identified alternative voting methods, would there be an opportunity to explore implementing further methods in the future? So, what does the future of voting look like?
That's a good question. I think whatever council decides to do in terms of method of voting for the 2022 election, I mean, we're in a unique period in time, right? That couldn't have been predicted. So we don't know where we would be, for the 2026 election. But I do want to emphasize that whatever council decides to do, that would be for the 2022 municipal election. I think that for a future council, all voting methods could be back on the table for future consideration. Whatever council decides to do for 2022 does not preclude them from doing something additional or something different in future elections.
Great. Anyone else anything to add?
Yeah, I think that, doing this research, I've been looking at council reports from other municipalities going back to the early 2000s and what has evolved over time with other communities. And you can see that people are trying different things. And sometimes you have to go, you have to look at each election and see what worked and what didn't. And there are municipalities who have used certain voting methods and now are, combining voting methods, or perhaps, changing gears or switching gears. So elections evolve, and we have to adapt over time. And certainly each election will look at what's working and what's not, and present those to council for their approval.
Great. Well, I don't have any more online questions, and I don't see any more in the Q&A or chat feature here. So I'm going to assume that this is going to conclude our presentation for this evening. I do want to thank you for your participation and the thoughtful discussion this evening. Definitely a lot of information to process. We do certainly appreciate it. Please continue to provide us with any feedback at saultmarie.ca/election. And all of the feedback that is gathered throughout the engagement process will be considered as part of the 2022 municipal election planning process. So thank you very much and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.